no, oh yeah, we're gonna get started. We're shy one member for a quorum, but this is a work session. There's no action to be taken. And the clerk has started the recording. This is work session on February 18th on the affirmative action plan. And go ahead, Madam Clerk, if you want to take the roll.
Ms. Allard,
Here.
Mr. Constant,
Here.
Mr. Dunbar, Ms. Kennedy, Ms. LaFrance, Mr. Presberdia, Mr. Peterson, Ms. Quinn Davidson, Mr. Rivera,
Present.
Mr. Weddleton.
Here.
And Ms. Zalatel.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. So this work session is going to be conducted by Mr. Rivera. I'll be here to keep the order if needed. I don't imagine there's going to be any issues. And so, Mr. Rivera, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have just a series of questions to hopefully set the foundation for the discussion, and I'll try to be quick with them. So first, hopefully everyone is here that can answer these questions, but can the administration just explain sort of what they see as a very basic question as the purpose of an affirmative action plan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, or Mr. Rivera. I don't know who to call the chair today.
Yeah, I'll be chairing. He has the floor.
Thank you, thank you. So just for your edification, here in the room, we have the Chief Human Resources Officer, Nikki Shibaka, along with Ron Kamahaley. Ron, I'm sorry, I don't know your title. Director. He's the one who effectively was the workhorse behind the affirmative action plan. Junior Amavai, who's our Chief Equity Officer, and Terrence Shanigan, who is the Director of Legislative Affairs. So this particular program is established in code with the responsibility of being in the HR department. So I will just turn it over to them and I will let them answer your question. Can you please restate it one time for the record, just so we can launch in?
Sure. Yeah, it's just a super basic intro question. What does the administration see as the purpose of an affirmative action plan?
Good morning. My name's Ron Kamahaley. I'm the Director of Employment, Records, and Classification at Human Resources. We actually have a slide in our presentation that answers that question, so I'll try and bring that up.
Yep. There you go. Do you have the slide open, Ron?
It's in PowerPoint.
Okay, so you have to open your PowerPoint first. There you go. Now you'll be able to go back to that. Yep, left screen. I'm not seeing it. We have emailed it too. There you go, right there. You got it.
There it is.
All right. Can you see our screen?
Yes, we can. And I guess at this point, Mr. Chair, I'll leave this up to your discretion. I'm happy to have HR go through the presentation, and then I'm happy to go in the queue after that for questions.
Okay, that's up to you as you have the floor. So if you want to wait, go ahead and let's do the presentation.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. This is Nikki Chibaka, Chief Human Resources Officer, for the record. I'm just going to talk briefly on the first couple of slides and then turn it over to Director Ron Kamahaley. Just first, a quick introduction of Director Kamahaley. He's been an HR professional for 22 years. He spent 19 years working at the University of Alaska, Anchorage. He was the campus HR director there, the regional personnel officer. He also served as the interim director of equity and compliance and Title IX coordinator. He was a member of the UAA Diversity Action Council. He was also a contributing author of UAA's Diversity and Inclusion Plan that was published in 2017, and I believe may still be up on its site. He also was an adjunct professor for 20 years at the College of Business and Public Policy UAA, where he taught HR and HR-related classes. He became an expert in AAPs. It was basically a trial by fire when UAA was, its AAP was audited by the Office of Federal Contractor Compliance Programs at the federal level. And they received a no defects noted letter from that office. So it just speaks to the excellent work he did there and the continued excellent work that he's been doing for us. Before he launches into the presentation, just wanted to give you all sort of a history of Immuni's work with AAPs. You'll notice in this slide, I just wanted to highlight, we have had gaps. We've had AAPs that were completed in 2005, 2006, 2007, 2011, 2012, and 2014. But the Muni did not complete AAPs in 2008, 2009, 2010, 2013, 2015, 2016, 2017, and 2018. When Director Kamahele came on board with Immuni several years ago, he relaunched the efforts to make sure that we were completing our AAPs. And so he completed AAPs in 2019, 2020, and then 2021. The AAPs for 2020 and 2021 were submitted to the Assembly. My understanding is we didn't have a work session on them last for the 2020 AAP, but there were a few questions that he answered via email. And right now, of course, we are hard at work on the 2022 AAP, which we hope to have for you all sometime next month. So with that, I will pass it on to Director Kamahele.
And thank you very much.
Before we proceed, there was a request in the chat to change over to presentation mode so the small font becomes bigger. Thank you very much.
That help you?
Yes, thank you. Not used to just one screen.
No,
You should
I
have
know.
like 3 or 4.
No worries. I'm here for your tech support.
Good morning, all. So the first slide here, this is actually an excerpt from the AAP that was submitted to the Assembly, but I like to throw it up here just as, showing a net demographic overview, the MOA comparison of 2020 to 2021. So as you can see under the MOA 2020 and MOA 2021, that shows the demographic composition of the municipality of Anchorage. I also threw in a column for Anchorage working age population to get a picture of, what does the Anchorage area look like in terms of working age population. So we can begin to compare that to our workforce. So right away, you can kind of see some large differences. For example, gender is, almost exactly 50-50 in the population, but it's about 2/3 male at municipality versus 1/3 female. So to try to have better context for evaluating our workforce, I included that column called occupation-based availability. So we have access to data through the, it's called the EEO tabulation, that has the demographic composition in the Anchorage census area by occupation. So municipality of Anchorage doesn't employ every type of occupation that exists. So I pulled all of the occupations that we do employ, and I show the demographic availability based upon occupation. And so you begin to see how the differences between the working age population and actually, people we actually employ begins to narrow quite a bit. I also put this in there to sort of begin to frame what is to come when we look at placement goals. Again, placement goals are based upon occupation, the demographic composition within particular occupations when we do our analyses. So here's the answer to the question earlier. And this is pulled straight from the Code of Federal Regulations for Affirmative Action Programs. And these two sentences here, I think I couldn't say it any better, so I just put them on this slide. So affirmative action programs are a management tool, and they are designed to make sure equal opportunity exists in the organization. It's very important to understand that underlying premise for all AAPs is that absent discrimination and over time, an organization's workforce will generally reflect the gender, racial, and ethnic profile of the labor pools from which the contractor recruits and selects. And then another major part of an AAP is this diagnostic component, which is the greatest part of AAP, which involves quantitative analyses, which I'll discuss briefly as we move forward. Does that answer a question, sir?
Yes, thanks. I will have questions at the end. Thanks.
First, a few terms and definitions. There are many terms of art in affirmative action plans, and so it's important to define things up front so that things later make sense. A key feature in doing our analyses for an affirmative action plan is the job group. And so the municipality has around 400 distinct job classifications. And so what the federal government has organizations do is to take all of their jobs and group them together based upon similar duties, similar compensation, and similar opportunities for promotion. And so our 400 individual jobs have been distilled into 53 job groups. Then, of course, each job group is then associated with citation codes, which come from the EEO tabulation. And this is how we determine within the Anchorage census area the availability for women and minorities within particular occupations. Another term, utilization. This simply refers to the percent of women or minorities in the workforce in a particular job group. And then availability, this is the percent of women or minorities within the Anchorage census area and those who are considered promotable within the MOA workforce. So later on, when you see indications of availability, it's actually a composite rate based upon availability in the general population in the census area, as well as an analysis of promotable women and minorities within the MOA workforce. And that's calculated from history. I analyze when there's hires or promotions, what job groups those came from. And then we can weight the availability data and get a more accurate availability rating. Another term here, placement goal. So placement goals are reasonably attainable objective or target in achieving equal opportunity. Again, within a job group, all of these analyses we'll be going through is based upon job group. It is not a quota, nor is it a set aside. It is illegal to take into account race or gender in decision-making and hiring or select for terminations or for promotions. We strive for equal opportunity right down the line. So a placement goal is determined by comparing your utilization to your availability. So your workforce composition compared to the availability in the census area or as promotables. You only establish a placement goal when there's a statistically significant underutilization of women or minorities. And I'll define real quick statistical significant here in a moment. And what you use the placement goal for is to measure progress towards equal opportunity. So progress is measured by comparing the actual placement rate, how many women or minorities were hired and promoted against what the goal was. So we will quickly move on here. Statistical significance, when we're looking at goal setting, there's what's called two standard deviation test. I believe in the AAP we submitted, there's an appendix there that explains this in more detail. But what you do is you use this two standard deviation test and you compare your utilization to the availability, and it will tell you whether if there is a difference in your utilization, in this case, if it's below what the availability is, then the two standard deviation test will tell you if that is the degree of difference is so much that it's something you wouldn't expect just from normal variation. So when an observed difference is within what we'd expect for normal variation, then the difference is not considered significant. And then no placement goal would be set. However, if the two standard deviation test is failed, then the observed difference is considered significant and a placement goal is set. And it's set at whatever the availability rate happens to be for that job group for either women or minorities, as the case may be. So here's our placement goals slide. I wanted to start off by pointing out, so an affirmative action plan, places where we do have placement goals, yeah, we want to look in those areas to see what steps we need to take, to promote opportunity for women or minorities. But this analysis ultimately showed that 85% of the MOA workforce, no placement goal was needed, which meant that in those areas, our workforce did reflect gender, racial, and ethnic profile within the labor pools, which we recruit and select from. But having said that, we had a number of placement goals in 2021. You can see the job groups in which there were placement goals: business finance 2, health 1, library 2, management 3, materials handling 1, and transportation 1. And then you can see the categories where there were goals that were needed, and then the placement goal that was in place in 2021. So since we're kind of down the road quite a bit from when all of this was originally calculated, and I've concluded the initial analyses for 2022, I can actually show whether or not we made progress toward the goals in 2021. And with business and finance, we did. We had a placement rate of 40% for minorities in business and finance, which means 40% of the minority applicants to these positions were hired. And so that's progress. In the other areas, there was not progress made. And the placement rates are indicated there. So we fell short of the target placement rates in the other areas last year. Again, this is data looking at 2021. And for materials handling, there was actually no placement activity at all. So that's why there's a 0 there. And then again, because I've already done the initial analysis, I threw in there for 2022, you'll see this again when we submit the plan here next month, but I put some of the initial figures in. So for business and finance in 2022, there is no goal indicated. Our utilization rate for minorities is 30.3%. The availability is 32.5%. It passed the 2 standard deviation test as that's close enough. And so no goal is needed. I might also add at this time, the EEO tabulation, this is the data set that we use to find the availability for women and minorities in the different occupations. That gets updated every 4 years, and it was just updated in October 2021. So this year's plan is actually using new, fresh data, and the availability for women and minorities in various occupations changed quite a bit. So as you can see for Health 1 and Library 2, again, no placement goals there either. Availability changed quite a bit. Material Handling 1, I'm sorry, Management 3, again, no goal there as well. Materials Handling 1, still a goal there. And Transportation 1, we still have a goal. Another term here, disparity. We're going to be going and looking at areas of concern, also called problem areas in the regulation itself. I like to call them areas of concern because you don't know it's a problem until you really look at it closely. So, but anyway, key word here is disparity. And so when a disparity is observed in any one of the 3 personnel processes which we analyze, the hiring, promotions, and terminations, two tests are used to determine whether the observed disparity is significant. And those are the 2 standard deviation tests, and then there's what's called the Fisher's exact. So if the observed disparity passes the 2 standard deviation test, then the degree of disparity, is what could reasonably be expected from normal variation. And so that difference is not considered statistically significant. However, if the disparity fails the 2 standard deviation test, then we run to the Fisher's exact. And this is because the Fisher's exact test, as the name suggests, is a more exact calculation. So we run that if that observed disparity fails the Fisher exact, then it's that degree of disparity is outside what you would expect, and it is considered significant, and further steps must be taken, to find whether there are, true barriers to equal opportunity, and if so, remove them, or if there's some other, non-discriminatory explanation to the observations. So for 2021, these were the areas of concern that were identified. There was a preliminary finding of statistical significance in these areas. So we looked into them more, but before I go on, I'd like to also point out that for 84% of the MOA workforce, personnel processes showed no disparity, which is a big chunk of the workforce. There is a lot of good work, sound work that is going on, but where there are areas of concern, we need to look into them. And so these were the areas that were identified. Upon closer examination in most of these areas, they were not found to be statistically significant. However, monitoring of these areas was warranted to still, keep an eye on these job groups and in these particular personnel processes, in which case I actually, during the course of the year, actually I think it was in July at mid-year, I just took a peek at the hiring activity, for example, for Health 2 to see, if there was any observable, disparities that might be going on. So there's monitoring that was happening. Let's see, was there any? Actually, the law enforcement for separations females. This is a good example of why we do the methodology that we do. Statistically, the number of females that separated from law enforcement 4, which is actually everyone in law enforcement 4 is our police officers. Not senior police officers, they're law enforcement 3, but police officers. So police officers who've been with us for 5 years or less. And so it was this measure actually failed the Fisher exact test. So the number of separations was beyond what you would expect. And so we looked into that and to see if there was an actual barrier to equal opportunity there, or was there a non-discriminatory explanation? And as it turned out, all of the separations were voluntary and were for personal reasons that were unconnected, with work or the job itself. So this was a good example of when you go through these different steps and to be able to target your efforts to examine certain areas to see if there are unique circumstances or if there are real barriers to equal opportunity. It helps us focus on, our energies into areas that can really make a difference. So you also received a separate plan for veterans, and that's because the rules for assembly of affirmative action plans for women and minorities and veterans, they're different. You don't go through all the same steps with veterans as you do with affirmative action plans for women and minorities. The main feature is to see if your hiring rate is in line with the federally established hiring benchmark. That's also why the Veterans AAP is very much shorter than for women and minorities. So the hiring benchmark, again, that's established by the Director of the Office of Federal Contractor Compliance Programs. And for 2021, the hiring benchmark was 5.7%, which means organizations should aspire to be hiring at least, 5.7% of their hires should be veterans. In our case, our hire rate was 12.3%. Our overall utilization for veterans is 11.8%. So we were able to conclude that our recruiting efforts were satisfactory. Also, there's a separate format and rules for disability AAPs. That's why, again, there's a separate document. However, in this area with disability, we were very low in our utilization rate, 0.4%. The OFCCP utilization goal for organizations is 70%. So because this utilization rate was so low, I went and started to see why. So I started off by saying, okay, I want to see when and how do we ask people, applicants, to voluntarily self-identify. And so when I went hunting around to see, at what point in the application process is the question posed and how is the question framed, I couldn't find the question. anywhere. And I was puzzled because I'm like, I have applicants who, voluntarily disclose this, not very many, but I have applicants. So where did the question go? I wound up going back to our NeoGov technical support. NeoGov is the applicant tracking platform that we use. I went to the technical support with this question and they hunted around. And what they were able to tell me was that in 2014, the question was being posed to applicants for a short time, and then it was turned off. When I say turned off, it was turned off by the Muni. Somebody here turned it off. NeoGov has a standardized form that's presented to all applicants on their platform, but the organization subscriber can turn that on or off. I don't know why it was turned off. But once I found that it was turned off, they showed me how to turn it back on again, which I did in October 2021. So basically, we have incomplete data here to actually draw any conclusions. So, steps we're taking to get the data that we need. One, we reactivated the form in NeoGov, so we are collecting that data. In fact, you'll see in our 2020 AAP that we doubled the amount of employees who disclosed experiencing a disability in a few short months of actually collecting the data. Also, employers are required to periodically invite their current workforce to self-identify as experiencing a disability. We, the Muni, have not been doing that. I came to learn that SAP was configured to collect this data, but when SAP was turned on in 2017, this feature was not. It was not activated. I have since submitted a request for change to turn that feature back on, and it's being reviewed. There's all kinds of elaborate rituals that have to be followed with SAP. In addition, we have taken other steps to enhance our utilization and to create equal opportunity for persons experiencing disability. We've begun a collaboration with the State of Alaska Department of Labor and Workforce Development and the State of Alaska Vocational Rehabilitation Office. Also, we'll be attending the Voc Rehab Job X conference that is coming up here in the spring, I believe. And also the Department of Labor and Workforce Development will be attending the MOA's annual job fair. So we're hoping to make great strides this year with creating equal opportunity for persons with disabilities. And that.
If you go down to that button, right next thing, yep, that one, I see the button.
All right, thank you for that presentation. And Mr. Rivera.
Great, thanks. Thanks for that presentation. That was very helpful. That actually answered a few of my questions, but I'm going to go ahead and go through the remainder of my questions quickly. So first is, you might have answered this, but I maybe missed it. Can you tell me where exactly the data comes from that gets inputted into an affirmative action plan?
Yes, sir. So there's two primary sources of data. The first comes from NeoGov, which is our applicant tracking platform. Every time we make a hire, I pull down all of the applicants for the requisition where somebody was hired. And so in that way, we can do an analysis, for the hiring aspect. I want to say there was probably I think there was about 7,000 or 8,000 application records in the data set for this year. So that's the first area. The second is actually from SAP itself, and that's where I pull down all hires, separations, and promotions. What I do is at the end of every month, I collect, all of those actions, those personnel actions for the preceding month, and then I pile them all into a database that I can then use to put together the final data set that's uploaded into our software that we use to do the overall analysis.
Thanks. And can you tell me where census data comes into play?
Sure. So I mentioned it a couple of times. It's called the EEO tabulation. And that data set is put together by a collaboration between the United States Census Bureau and the Bureau of Labor Statistics. A big primary source of their data comes from what's called the American Community Survey. In between the every 10-year census, the Census Bureau is doing other censusing type work and coming up with different estimates. But anyway, they work with the Bureau of Labor Statistics to connect, occupations to, the persons who are in those occupations by census area.
Great, thanks. So what if there is sort of a certain job grouping where, as an example, there are very few or no women in that particular job grouping? How does the affirmative action plan deal with this? And specifically, does the plan sort of require the MOA to develop a goal, or does the plan say, that's not my issue, that's more sort of a workforce issue outside of anything that the plan might have to say about it?
Well, if it's a case where, like you say, if there's no females in a particular job group in the workforce with the MOA, the first thing we do is look at the census data to see if there generally are women at all in that occupation. And there are some occupations in the data set, the EEO tabulation data set, where there shows 0. So anyway, so that's part of that goal setting analysis process, is to see what is the actual availability based on occupation, and then what's our workforce look like. And then after running the 2 standard deviation tests, if it says, yeah, you really need to have a goal here, then we establish the goal.
Thanks. So I guess just a simpler version of that response is basically, if census says there are no women in this particular work group, then the affirmative action plan says, well, there's no goal to develop. Is that accurate?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so then I guess my sort of last question. So have you looked at other jurisdictions' affirmative action plans, and sort of do they delve into this territory at all, or are pretty much all affirmative action plans follow this same model?
So what I've shown to you, what's been presented to you, and what I've shown to you today, every one of these components are required features for any affirmative action plan across this country. These are all drawn from requirements that are in the Code of Federal Regulations about how you will do your affirmative action program.
Okay, great, thank you. So then I guess I just have one final comment. Again, I really appreciate the discussion, the discussion responses and the presentation. So, if you were to go out and talk to people in the community, and especially BIPOC groups and BIPOC leaders, and sort of tell them that according to our affirmative action plan that we're all good to go with our hires, no need to worry. I can tell you myself based on the conversations I have and the experience I have in our community, that I would get some weird looks and people would disagree with me entirely. In fact, Talk of Alaska, recently there was a discussion on this very topic where, sort of as one example, a guest focused in on Black lawyers in Alaska. And they spoke about sort of the stagnation in the number of Black lawyers in Alaska over the last decade and how it's pretty much not grown, right? And unfortunately, the way our affirmative action plan works, the data used, the tests done, from my standpoint and perspective, sort of it defends the status quo. To be clear, no one's to blame for that. You put in the data, it spits out the results, and the affirmative action plan is technically correct. It is what it is based on the data you put in. So, I say kudos to the folks who did the work. But I think just because the data says that we're good doesn't really mean that we're good from a community's perspective. Affirmative action plans, from my perspective, at least the way that this is done, they're not really meant to change the status quo. And I think that's what many in our community are asking for. So definitely looking forward to see what we can do sort of beyond the envelope of what this plan has in line to how we can delve into these, what I think probably the plan sees more as workforce issues versus strictly affirmative action issues. Again, I appreciate this. And, I think just one final comment, one of the things that I found most striking in your presentation was looking at the working age population versus employment, and how sort of all of the non-white numbers went down significantly, whereas the number and percentage for the white population went up a lot. It was like 10 or 12% that it went up. So, that just tells me that there is a lot of work to do in this arena. And I hope that this presentation that you provided, if you haven't sent it to the clerk, that would be really helpful so that we can get it up online and we can take a deeper look at some of the numbers you presented. Thanks.
Assemblymember Rivera, thank you. This is Nikki Chewbacca. Just a couple quick comments. I think Ron wanted to also respond as well. I appreciate what you just shared, especially using the example of the Black lawyers. And I think that's one of those things where obviously the municipality can increase the number of Black lawyers in the workforce, but it is certainly something that, we all can partner with other organizations and entities and stakeholders who are concerned about that issue, and see how we can collaborate together to increase those numbers of African Americans in the workforce who have law degrees and have passed the bar. But obviously, as a young MOA, we don't control, as you sort of indicated, the workforce side of it. One thing about what you just observed on the numbers, the percentages, I think Ron wanted to mention something about it. But one thing I would also note, though, is the population, the white population percentage-wise is much larger than any sort of individual minority percentage-wise. So, when you have a huge increase that you're seeing on the white population side, that should be expected given the larger percentage of white people in our community, I would say. But I don't know, Ron, if you wanted to add something to that.
Oh, with regard to that, that is mainly driven by the occupations that we employ. I mean, and maybe more to your point a little earlier, Mr. Rivera, I fully understand and acknowledge, what you're saying. In fact, in the AAP we submitted, it's mentioned there that, we are taking, census-based data from our locality, and we are measuring ourselves against that. But absolutely, there could definitely exist disparities within the larger community or within larger professional areas that stem from long-standing other societal factors. Totally true. But nevertheless, I mean, the steps that we are taking here with the plan, you know, that's still, you know, striving for, you know, equal opportunity as it exists. Now, should someone be out there saying, hey, we need, like Director Shavaka said, do we need, you know, more attorneys, you know, to stand for the bar? Absolutely. But affirmative action plans are based on employers and employment. And that's what the federal government, you know, directs us to do.
So I think you just totally affirmed what Mr. Rivera said, is that the system as it's developed protects the status quo, which means as it is developed and how it's done, which is, thank you for that clarity and restating what Mr. Rivera had said. Mr. Weddleton is in the queue.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I appreciate this discussion. You know, when we got this affirmative action plan, I think it was last year, it surprised me because I think I was looking more for something like, you know, Felix was talking about kind of a more society. How do we compare with broader numbers? It's not by job class, but there's, and that was just, I had no clue on what these things are about. So this is interesting, but a couple things popped out. So if race can't be used in hiring, then what do you do to meet the, you know, if you have a category that has a placement goal, what do you do to try to move towards that placement goal?
So this is Nikki Chabak. Ron have more to say on this, but one of the things is removing barriers that if we find any seem to be getting in the way, potential sticking points to sort of level the playing field, so to speak. So one example, one thing that we've been doing, recognizing that, you know, a lot of, you know, communities, they might not know where to look sometimes for some of the jobs that we have available, and sometimes our database isn't the most user-friendly as well. So one of the things that we've been doing is we've been every quarter we've been sending an Excel spreadsheet with just a list of the jobs that are available, positions, and to leaders in the Black community, say, hey, you know, here are some job openings that we have. If you have any folks that you know that are interested, you know, forward this on to your community members in your community. And if they have any questions, they can reach out to HR. We can help them determine whether they can qualify for the job or not. You know, that's one example of, you know, one thing that you can do or that we are doing to address that. But what we can't do is provide preferential treatment to one race over another. Everybody has to have an equal playing field and be judged on the merits. So I don't know if Ron, you had more you wanted to add to that.
Oh, sure. So when analyzing, like, for example, hiring, when we analyze that and determine whether or not there was a hiring disparity, we compare the number of women or minorities who actually applied for the job compared to the number of women or minorities who are hired for the job. And if we find that there's, for example, maybe fewer women or minorities actually hired based, you know, from, you know, the actual pool of applicants, that's where, you know, it gets flagged as something to look at. So in the terms of hiring, it's not based upon, you know, what our workforce actually looks like. It's based upon how many people were actually put applications in to be, you know, a police officer or a senior accountant or what have you. So when you do that too, you also, as part of looking at areas where there may be a problem, I then go and look at the application rates to see what is the rate of women or minorities who are actually applying for the jobs, because that could be the issue. Maybe we're just not attracting enough applicants we're hiring, but not at the rate that we would like. So that would then tell us, okay, what we need to do is get the word out, like Director Shabaka was saying, to different groups of people, so we can attract those applicants and get them into the pool.
All right, thank you very much. And that, points to an area that the Assembly may consider working on is actual recruitment efforts for specific positions. It's very helpful information. Ms. Allard and then Mr. Gates, and then we're just 3 minutes left in this work.
Thank you. So I'm in a good position, I suppose, when it comes to being able to be an expert on this situation. I have 4. I'm disabled. I'm a veteran. I'm a female, and I'm Latina. And one thing that I realized when I came into the workforce in the federal government and in the military, I didn't much like being chosen or picked because of one of those 4 criteria. I always wanted to be picked on my merit. And when I went forward with working for the federal government as a civilian, it was alarming to me that I would get an extra 10 points to be picked because I was a veteran. And then I would get more points on my scoreboard because I was also disabled, I was also Latina, and I was also a female. So when it came to competing against other women in that same criteria, it made me feel better that all of us were on a level playing field. The numbers that you have shown today show that we're working hard as an MOA to encourage those of any of those checked boxes to apply for positions. And yeah, maybe we could get the word out more. But if there aren't qualified candidates, I have to tell you, in the military, I didn't care what your skin color was. If I had boots on the ground, I just wanted to make sure that you had my back and then I was going to survive whatever action I was in. So I am very pleased with the numbers that the MOA is showing. And I don't want it to be something where we discriminate against others because they're white and their percentage numbers have gone up based on a myriad of things, whether the population has increased, whether that type of job, for whatever reason, white individuals have decided that that's a workforce that they want to go in. So I am very pleased with the direction that the MOA is doing, and reaching out to other minority groups is fine. I've dealt with a ton of discrimination in my life and it hasn't held me back. We continue to drive on, and I'm just really pleased in the direction the MOA is going. And thank you so much for the presentation.
Thank you.
Wow. Mr. Gates.
Thanks, Mr. Constant. Yes, asked to speak, and I guess 2 short points. The first one, there was some discussion of lawyer positions, and FYI, I know of one in the municipality. That aside, the presentation's been excellent, and all this information in the report, it looks great. I just noted that the AIM, it's submitted as an assembly information memorandum, and those are normally reporting data and progress and so forth. But in our code, it refers to the reporting requirements under section of our code 3.120. And in subsection B, it says that the affirmative action plan and any amendments shall be submitted to the Assembly for approval. And I just wanted to note that, and I haven't dug into the details here, but if this is only reporting and it's not amending the affirmative action plan that we've had in place for years, then that AIM is fine. That's a good vehicle. But if there's amendments to the affirmative action plan in these attachments and in the fuller 200-something page plan that was available from HR, and I can't tell, but if there are amendments, then the more appropriate, I guess, document or instrument is an assembly memorandum, not an AIM, in order to be approved by the assembly, or an assembly resolution, either one. But again, maybe this is only reporting and that's fine, but if there's amendments to the plan, I think we need more than an AIM to do so. Like we see for contracts that require assembly approval, they come in by AIMs. So thank you.
All right, thank you very much, everybody. We're 1 minute over, and at this point we will adjourn. And we may come back to this topic on a regular or semi-regular basis to address progress on the plan. Right? Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.